Peter Drucker, the management sage, said not long before he passed on that if you look at Africa and Europe, the difference between the quality of life of the average person, not nobility, the average person in Africa and in Europe at the beginning of the 20th century was marginal, could hardly notice. At the close of the 20th century, the difference in the quality of life of the average African and the average European was like night and day. The 20th century is the century of Africa's independence. So what happened that dramatically changed the conditions of the average African person relative to the average European person in a century where Africans took charge of their destiny? Clearly, this must have something to do with this thing called leadership and how Africa has been led. This is why leadership and the scourge of poverty in Africa is critical for making progress. Now, it's easy to throw this at people who occupy positions of authority, but the truth of the matter is that we all lead. And part of the problem with Africa is that we don't try to walk our talk. We point at those people who have positions of authority. But let me tell you, you might have a position of authority and not be a leader. And you might have no position of authority and you may be the leader, the person who can bring about profound change. There's a Canadian gentleman called Robin Sharma, who was in Lagos in February of last year by the time of these annual lectures. And he's the author of a book titled The Leader Who Had No Title. And in my teachings, I often talk of a bank that I used to consult for many years ago that suddenly lost a lot of money from one customer withdrawing his business. And they could not, each time they called him to say, "What's the matter?" He would say, "Oh, no problem, no problem." It was an Asian customer. And then one day they determined, okay, we're going to go and meet this guy. Something is wrong. He's still turning over billions every week. We know. But he's not coming to our bank. When they then put pressure on him, they found out that one day he came to the bank shortly after 5 p.m. He was casual. He drove himself in the country of the big man, where it's expected that every big man comes in a big car and is chauffeur driven. He parked his car and the security man said to him, "Yes." And he said, "I have a meeting with the general manager." And the security man was like, just rude to him, and said, "Well, if you have a wristwatch, you will know it's past 5. We don't open after 5 o'clock." I said, "Yes, he's expecting me. We have an appointment." And he got a raw deal. And he took his business elsewhere. And the bosses didn't know. So tell me, bank lost billions. Managing director was not responsible for it, was a simple foot soldier, a security man. If he was a leader, he would know the consequence of his behavior. And that's really part of the point that Robin Sharma makes. And in dealing with the scourge of poverty in Africa, we have to come to terms with this problem. That is not a matter of pointing fingers. It's a matter of all of us walking our talk, taking our destiny into our hands to upturn this condition where in Africa the world is getting wealthier in terms of average people's quality of life. In Africa, we're getting poorer, really. The truth must be told, in spite of the progress that we're making now. And the difference between the poor and the people who have access to either power or whatever in Africa is getting wider and wider. The index that measures income distribution in Africa, in the world, the Gini index, in Africa, it's getting less and less decent. And that's why you have all kinds of wars. There's if you don't mind my going down this track, there's an American called Robert Kaplan who's written a book titled The Coming Anarchy. And he projects on how the West Africa region, for example, will fall into complete anarchy because of things like ethnicity, things like religion, things like growing income inequalities. So, do we want to live in anarchy? If you look at it, at a point in time, by the way, his book opens with Sierra Leone during the Sierra Leonean Civil War. in an interview with the Minister of Sierra Leone, who makes this powerful point that what happened to us here in Sierra Leone was the revenge of the poor. The revenge of the poor. If Africa's leadership does not understand what is coming to us from the revenge of the poor, then Africa's leadership cannot be called leadership.